Okay, so we have the notion that Moshe turns to God and asks God to appoint a leader. And it seems like a very innocent request. And God says, okay, we're going to appoint Joshua. But whenever you have a story of inheritance and leadership and transition, even if you own a company and you have to transition it to the next generation, it's very, very complicated. So don't get distracted by the fact that in the story, the way it's told in the Torah, it seems like it's a very smooth story. Obviously, there's layers here, and there's disappointment, and there's tension here in the story. And that is that the commentaries say that Moshe hopes that his own child or children would succeed him. And there was precedent for that because Aaron's son, Aaron passed away at this point in last week's parsha, 2 parshas ago, in portion of Chukat. Aaron passes on, and Aaron sees his son take him over in his lifetime. In other words, before he passes away, the position of high priesthood is transferred from Aaron to his son Elazar. So Moshe wants his son to succeed him, and we know the end of the story that God says no, it will be Joshua. So that's an emotionally complex story. Go ahead, Dr. Tamarin, please.
Rabbi, a rather simplistic question, but I've thought of before. I mean, we use email, we use chat, we use everything. How does Moses actually communicate with God? And how does God communicate with Moses as described by our sages? I mean, how does this even take place?
So that is a wonderful question. It's a question that I cannot answer because I'm not a prophet. In other words, prophecy, when you say they hear the voice of God, I don't know what that means. It doesn't necessarily mean a voice. It could be, prophecy is a certain form of awareness. And you get this awareness. The prophet has a certain awareness and a certain intuition that either he learns to cultivate or God gifts him. Because in those days, in the times of the temple, there were a lot of people, they actually had schools of prophecy where people would meditate, people would play music and try to open themselves to spirituality. And sometimes they would be inspired. Now, if you look at the Bible, there are only 48 prophets that are mentioned. But that's only because those are the prophecies that are relevant for all generations. So it's codified and canonized in the Bible. But the concept that people seek spiritual enlightenment, that was more widespread. But the bottom line is that I can't describe exactly what it is, but it's certain awareness that a person has. Now, Maimonides was very interested in prophecy, and the Guide to the Perplexed, I think he writes there are 10 levels of prophecy, and he goes through what they are and what they look like, but I'm not an expert. In some ways, it's all, yeah, so I don't know the short answer. Short answer is I don't know. But if you see somebody says, when the prophet experienced prophecy, it was an awareness that he receives, and it's also there's a certain clarity that comes along with it, which I don't want to bring up. I shouldn't really bring up the story because it's a distraction, because it's a complicated story. But when Maimonides talks about the story of the binding of Isaac, and he says, what's the point of that story? One of the takeaways, not the only takeaway, not necessarily the most important takeaway, but one of the takeaways is that when the prophet experiences prophecy, it comes along with a certain degree of certainty, because Abraham would not attempt to sacrifice his son because maybe he thought of something of an idea. So it's just the experience is all encompassing, is what I'm trying to say. Beyond that, I don't have much to add because I'm not a prophet, at least not yet. Go ahead, Dr. Bob, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. This is almost in quick succession, 3 named portions.
Yeah.
We have Balak, and then we have Korach, or other way around, and then suddenly we have Pinchas.
Yeah.
The other 2 we know are kind of nefarious characters. This one we're left, as a toss-up. I mean, firstly, there's a question of his pedigree. They make a stress that this guy's, originally from Levi, or I mean, they trace his pedigree back into
Aaron, right?
Aaron, right. And then we get questions about, is Moshe happy about this
Right.
Then we get what Jonathan Sacks says is this guy a zealot, or is he, is he a hero or an anti-hero? So I can't remember a portion whereby you go in with such drama, not knowing exactly where the fellow stands. And then,
Right. So, at least from my perspective, biased by my biases is that the people question whether or not it was the right move, and more importantly, at least the way the Rebbe learns it, not so much they agree that it was the right move, but they question the motivation. Right? It's much easier to question motivation, right? Even if it was necessary to sometimes kill the wicked villain, right? But then the question is, why are you doing it? Not you. Why are you doing it? Maybe you're doing it because you're cruel. So people questioned his action, and more importantly, people questioned his motivation. But I personally, I think that if you read the Torah with an open mind, if you read this section with an open mind, you have to come to the conclusion that the Torah is endorsing, or God is endorsing what he did, because what could be a greater endorsement than God saying, giving him peace, and more importantly, that he and his descendants are going to have the eternal covenant of priesthood. So there's a technicality here. He is the descendant of Aaron, but he wasn't a priest because he was born before Aaron and his sons became priests. So the idea was, once Aaron and his 4 sons were chosen, it's Aaron, his 4 sons, and any child born to them after they were chosen as priests or consecrated as priests. So Pinchas, even though he's a direct grandson of Aaron, is not included. But here he becomes included, and it's for him, not only for him, but also for his children. So I think that this is an endorsement. So, but the idea that the whole story is very vague, and we give him the name of the parsha, even though nobody knows, nobody's sure, nobody could confidently say that he did the right thing at the right moment, or they didn't know it. At least in the beginning, they weren't sure. That's telling, and that's part of the overall theme of what Pinchas represents, which we're going to hopefully try to explore. But I just want to come back to the contrast with Moshe. So what does God say? God says, because Pinchas atoned for the Jewish people, he removed my wrath, and he atoned for the Jewish people. That's why he and his descendants are going to be, he's going to get the covenant of priesthood for him and his descendants. Now, I ask you a question. Who was the person who removed God's wrath from the Jewish people multiple times over? Of course, Moshe. And in the same parsha, where Pinchas, we say, because you remove the wrath of the people, of God against the people, that's why Pinchas will be rewarded, and his descendants will also be priests just like he is. So isn't it justice that Moshe himself should for sure get that position, that the reward should be for him and his children? And yet, Moshe, in that same parsha, Moshe's children Moshe does not merit to see his position be passed on to his children. Now, I can give you the practical reason why that is, but I could also give you the Kabbalistic. So I don't know what you want to start with, the practical or the Kabbalistic. But all I'm just trying to show is that if the story of Moshe's selection, Moshe's request was in a different parsha, you can maybe overlook it and say, well, but here it's contrasted, right? In the same parsha, beginning of the parsha is Pinchas, and Pinchas is going to get the covenant for him and for his children. Why? Because he atoned for the Jewish people and removed God's wrath. Welcome to the club. Moshe has been doing that his entire career, right? And yet Moshe, his children, he's not going to get any any covenant that's going to last for his children. So at a minimum, we have to address it and think about it and say, what is this? Is there a deeper story here? And does this maybe actually reflect the career? I don't want to say career, because Pinchas was more like a one-time event, but I would say does this reflect on the what Moshe represents and Moshe's leadership represents, contrasting that to what Pinchas's leadership represents and how they're different? And of course, what's the lesson to us? All these things have to be tied in together within the next 41 minutes or less. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Tamarin, please.
Here's a question. Apparently, it is seen as a great mitzvah, a great achievement if you can diminish God's wrath. Now, the reality is God can be angry and God cannot be angry. So in a sense, it's almost like saying the greatest child is the one who can get the father to stop losing his temper. So I mean,
Okay, so that's a topic that I didn't want to discuss, but I'll discuss it for 5 minutes. Talk about what is, I said, wrath. And it's also, we have to look at the word for kina, jealousy. It's an important word in the parsha because he's a zealot, but there's no perfect word for that in English. Kina is translated as jealousy, but it's obviously not jealousy. So we can take 2-3 minutes and talk about that. But what I would say is it's not so much calm the father down. The father's an alcoholic or can't control his temper, and you have to look at the son to take care of the problem. It's almost like if somebody, let's say, if a child stands up for the father's honor so that the father does not have to do that for himself. That's what we're talking about, right? It's almost like if I'm your friend and someone says something not nice about you, so you could defend yourself, but if you have someone else steps in to defend you, that's obviously much more. That's obviously brings you great joy. So it's not so much anger. It's not really so much anger. I'm happy to open up the verse for a second and sort of delve into this point, but I don't want to take over the whole discussion. But I think no, but I think it's important because especially if I have your expertise on the screen on the call, I want to talk about this for a second, maybe. So let's look at the verse. Okay, so this is the opening statement to the parsha. God spoke to Moses saying, Pinchas, son of Elazar, son of Aaron, the priest, diverted my anger, Heshivat Chamati, or brought back my anger from the Israelites by zealously avenging me among them. I therefore did not destroy the Israelites because of my zeal. Now, I don't know what zeal means. Or zealously, zeal. Let's check up zeal. Let's look at zeal definition. Let's see what we got here. Merriam-Webster, zeal, eagerness and ardent interests in pursuit of something, or fervor. Okay, so the problem with this word is, with this definition at least, is that zeal in this context is neutral. It doesn't tell you if it's positive or it's negative. If you're doing something with fervor, you're doing something with passion, then you're a zealot. Okay, that's fine. The problem is that the Hebrew word for kin'ah is more complicated. Kin'ah is translated as kin'ah is usually translated as jealousy. Do they have it here? By zealously avenging me among them. No, they don't write the word kin'ah, which is jealousy. You also have it in the yeah, this is not a great translation. It's not a literal translation. But if you want to look at, for example, if you want to look at the 10 Commandments, so the 10 Commandments, it says that God is an Elkanah. He's a jealous God. And therefore, if you serve idols, God is going to punish, right? So this idea of what does it mean that God is a jealous God? What does jealousy mean in this context? And what does it mean that Pinchas stands up to defend the jealousy of God? That's what this translation is. Vengeance. Vengeance is vengeance the word that I'm looking for? Translations.
Okay, so I'll come in for the consultation then.
Looks like Art Scroll translated closer.
What do they say? What does Art Scroll say?
They say when he jealously avenged.
Jealously. Okay, beautiful.
Zealously.
Zealotly, but I don't know what the zealot means.
It's my vengeance. Them.
Right. Venomous anger from the children of Israel. Please return my venomous anger from the children of Israel.
Zealotry almost implies an overabundance of enthusiasm.
Right. But okay, but I'm trying to say that yes, but the word kina doesn't have the word jealousy, and the word kina is translated as jealousy in modern Hebrew and modern English. But my point is that it means something a little bit different in the context of biblical Hebrew. And the example is, you say God is a jealous God in 10 Commandments, right? So what is really happening here? So The thesis, the idea is like this. The idea is that, how do I stop the sharing here so I can see what's going on over here? The idea is like this, that kin'ah, jealousy in the Bible is, there's no equivalent in English, I don't think, but it's the idea that when a person is let me just get to the point. It's the opposite. It's in a way, it's the other side of the coin of love, right? Let's say there's somebody you love and that person was offended. Somebody offends my friend. Okay. So I'm not going to go kill them, right? But if I'm truly and deeply in love with somebody or something, and somebody interferes with that person or with my connection to that person, then the more in love I am, the more crazy I act. Crazy, I mean irrational and super focused on defending my relationship with that person, right? And just like love is blinding, and just like love is irrational, so if I'm really in love with somebody and somebody interferes with this relationship, I'm going to act irrationally. But the idea, and that's the meaning of jealousy. The jealousy in biblical Hebrew is defending something that is very meaningful to you. That's what jealousy means. Not that jealousy in conventional English is, I'm jealous that you have something that I do not have. Here it's the opposite. Here is, I'm so deeply emotionally connected to something. I'm so in love that if you interfere with this relationship, I'm going to go crazy. Now, in a way, if I wouldn't be jealous, then it shows that I don't care, right? So what's the opposite of jealousy? Or at least the biblical meaning of jealousy, kin'ah. When you say God is a jealous God, what does it mean? It means that this relationship between God and the Jewish people is so important that if we serve idols, he's going to react wrath. Of course, God is not angry like we're angry. But the point is, he's going to react in an extreme way. Why? Because he can't control his temper? No, because he's in love. And love has two sides, right? Love has, I'm so in love with you, I'll do anything for you. And if the more in love I am, the more I would give up for you. And people do crazy things for love. They give up crazy things for love. They sacrifice everything they have for love. Whether or not it's a good idea or bad idea is a different question. But that's the feeling of love. So what's the other side of the coin of that? The other side of the coin is kin'ah, jealousy. You're interfering with my love. There's no limit to what I'm going to do. But it's not that I'm jealous of something that you have and I don't have. To the contrary, I'm defending something that is so critically important to me. So all I'm trying to say is that the English word for jealousy doesn't begin to do justice to what we're trying to discuss. But go ahead, Vicky, please.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. I think it's an interesting discussion. Maybe a little bit we steering away from what you to do, but I'll try to connect both doctors' questions together and see maybe from on the part of Pinchas, it was some kind of prophecy because God is jealous of other gods and he cannot stand idol worship. So does Pinchas. So the different levels of prophecy, he's not on the level that Moshe is because there is no other prophet like Moses. But in a way, Pinchas sensed that that's defending his religion.
Right. But he's going without the cover of the law. In other words, usually if somebody does something wrong, so you take them to court, and you have to have a trial, and you can't prosecute somebody without a defense. And then there's regulation of how to run a trial and how to do things. And that's the normal laws of conduct. And that's what usually happens. And that's when you have the protection of the law. But there are exceptions to the law. There are certain things where this situation is so dangerous that if you don't stop it, it's going to get out of hand. Then you'll have a rebellion, right? It's like almost like martial law. When you have martial law, there's no books, there's no law in the books. The extreme times call for extreme action. But the point is, don't expect the law to tell you that that's okay. You have to be willing to operate and take a certain amount of risk. And risk, first of all, saying maybe I'm wrong. And also risk, maybe people are going to question my motives. Very easy to question motives, right? Even if the action is okay, but the motive, they're going to say, you killed Pinchas, you killed these people, you killed Zimri and the Midianite prince, Cosby, because you're just bloodthirsty. You're just cruel. You're
But
saying it's for God. So it's very easy to question the motive. And that's why God comes in and says, no, it's actually a motive of peace. That this idea of Pinchas being taking a strong position is actually the opposite of his nature, and it's an exception to the rule, and it's not the rule. Right? So just so the point is, you're operating, even if it's the right thing, you're operating without the clear direction and therefore protection of the law. And the Talmud says something very interesting. The Talmud says Pinchas is coming to kill Zimri. Zimri, if he would defend himself, not either him or anyone in his tribe would defend himself or defend him by killing Pinchas, that would be justified because it's self-defense. And you're not an agent of the court, so you're not protected, right? So Pinchas actually, we could talk about the Rebbe's essay mentions this. So Pinchas is operating a great risk, not only risk for his reputation, but also risk for his own sense, his own safety. So
But
the point,
prophet is a risky job always.
prophet is a risky job, but usually the prophets talk. That's their expertise. They talk. They don't kill people, and people don't like prophets. Jeremiah was put in prison because he was taking down the morale of the people, saying that the Babylonians are going to be victorious over the Judea. So that wasn't popular, so they put him in prison. But usually the power of the prophet is with his mouth. And here, this is an exception where he takes a violent action, which is totally out of the norm. Okay, there's a lot to say about this, but I'm gonna get pulled in. I'll say one more point, and then we'll go back to the big picture. One more point is that we say he's a priest, and we say that Aaron, all of his descendants except for Pinchas were priests, and then because of this act, Pinchas joins the family. So just to say one point, what is the problem? What's the one flaw in Aaron's career, a potential flaw in Aaron's career? The one potential, Aaron's this loving guy. Everybody loved him. By the way, when Moses died, it says that the Israelites cried for him for 30 days. When Aaron cried, it says all the house of Israel cried for him for 30 days. Men, women, children. Aaron was much more loved than Moshe, right? Moshe is the lawgiver. Aaron was the loving uncle, okay? So everybody loved Aaron. And he was a very kind person, always trying to make peace between people, always trying to accommodate everybody. The one flaw in Aaron's career is that when it came to the moment of truth of the golden calf, he didn't stand up to the people and say, you're wrong. Okay? The danger of kindness without taking a stand, without taking a firm stand. And there was a flaw in that model of priesthood. And Pinchas, in a way, corrects the grandfather's flaw. He says, I'm a priest, I'm a man of peace, I'm a man of love. But it doesn't mean that if the moment calls for strength and I don't want to say cruelty, but justice, it doesn't mean I'm not going to act. And in a way, Pinchas corrects the family, and that's when the priesthood is complete. So it's an interesting, if you look at the story of Pinchas in isolation, you say, what is this big deal? We look at the broader story and the broader career of the priests and how they're loving people, but the danger of love. And love also has to have a measure of prepare to stand up for your values and defend your values. Now the priesthood is complete. Go ahead, Dr. Tamara.
My question is this, Rabbi. Have we had, there have been saints in the last 2,000 years, and there's a whole different notion of how one becomes a saint in the Catholic Church. Have we had any prophets in the last 2,000 years?
So I just want, I'll answer your question in a minute, but I want to say we have no saints.
No, of course not.
And the reason is because the Torah tells us, the verse says, not in the Torah, I think it's in Job, but the verse says there's no man on earth who doesn't sin. There's no perfection, right? Mm-hmm. Even Moshe sins, and even Moshe can't go into the land of Israel. So we have no saints, that we're done with saints, fine. The Talmud says there's no more prophecy. There's no more prophecy, and there's two ways to think about this. One way to think about it is there's no more prophecy. So what we have is there's different degrees of intuition that the sages refer to as Ruach HaKodesh, Holy Spirit. Some people can have intuition, but it's not prophecy. It's not as great as prophecy. But in some ways, what you could really think about it, when the era of prophecy ends, the era of the sages begins. Scholarship, okay? How do we know what to do today, last 2,000 years? Not by going to the prophet, by going to the sage. And the sage is anybody. That's the idea. Prophecy is from above. God has to decide to reveal himself to you. But scholarship is something that is accessible to anybody. And therefore, when the era of the last sages, the last prophets, Chagi, Zechariah, Malachi, the last prophets are the beginning of the Second Temple about 2,400 years ago. But after them, the leadership role that the prophet took, which is the moral voice, does not come from somebody who says, I sense that God is expressing himself to me. It's by scholarship. Could you interpret the Torah? Could you study the Torah by the principles of the Torah and derive wisdom from the Torah? And that's the era of the Mishnah and the Talmud and the oral Torah, which lasts till this very day. So in a way, it democratizes the process. And that's going back to the practical reason of why Moshe's sons were not chosen, because wisdom is not inherited. Wisdom has to be taken. Anybody could take the wisdom. And Joshua gets the job. Why? Because he was loyal to Moshe. Loyal means he never left his tent. And if you're a student and you want to learn, you never leave your teacher's tent. And that's how you learn. And that's why the Talmud says that in a way, serving your teacher is greater than learning from your teacher. Because where do you learn more about your teacher? When he's giving the lecture or how he lives his life on a regular basis, right? So you learn a lot, in a way, you learn a lot more. You have to have, to really understand the teacher, you have to have a more holistic view of the teacher, not just think about what he says in the lecture, but also learn how he lives his life. So the point here is, when you talk about wisdom, and Moshe is a prophet, but we don't refer to him as a prophet. We refer to him as a prophet, but in the common language, in Jewish culture, Moshe is called Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our teacher, right? And if you're talking about scholarship has nothing to do with lineage. Scholarship is anybody who wants to put in the work will become the scholar. So, and that's the practical reason why priesthood is a spiritual thing. It's a spiritual position that could be passed on by genetics, by spiritual genetics. But scholarship, and that's what Moshe's primarily role is, because even though he was the prophet, the conveyor of the Torah, but Torah wisdom now becomes a process of wisdom, and wisdom is something that is, I don't want to say it is earned, but because it has to be earned or developed, that's why it is not reserved for any specific person. And that's why the Talmud has all these statements about there's different crowns. There's the crown of priesthood, there's the crown of kingship, and there's the crown of Torah. And priesthood and kingship are reserved for certain tribes. To be a priest, you have to be descendant of Aaron. To be a king, you have to be from the tribe of Judah. But Torah is for everybody. And the Talmud makes the point that the crown of Torah is greater than the crown of priesthood. And if you have a priest who has an unbelievable lineage, then you have a scholar who is a mamzer, who was born from a prohibited union, so he has a terrible lineage. The scholar who is a mamzer takes precedent. So, because when it comes to scholarship, it has nothing to do about your lineage. It has to do with who you are and the work you put in. Go ahead, Dr. Bob.
Not to beat a dead calf into the ground, but aren't we a little easy? I mean, it's got to be the golden calf after the Meraglim probably is number 2 in terms of the worst acts in the Torah. And the big 3 which merit death is idol worship, I think idol worship, murder,
adultery and murder, right?
Sleeping with somebody's. Yeah. So why are we always giving the free pass to Aharon? Why are we suddenly using him as the model of spirituality and piety and loyalty?
Because I don't know the answer to your question. There are different answers, but if you want to just say on a purely practical level, right? On a purely practical level, Aaron is much more of a pragmatic leader, and pragmatic leaders sometimes you can't speak the truth because people don't want to hear it. And sometimes you have to speak the truth that people don't want to hear. And sometimes you can't speak the truth that people don't want to hear. And there's a role for each. So Aaron is very successful at delaying the process, the sin. He delays it almost by a full day. He doesn't delay it long enough. And then there's a whole medrash that somebody else, because you see when Moshe goes up the mountain, he tells the people, I'm leaving you 2 people, Aaron and Hur. Hur is the son of Miriam. And he says, if anyone has any trouble, go to them. And then Hur is off the map. There's no more Hur. What happened? So the Seder said, Aaron saw. Say, what did he see? You see, Hur said don't make the cow. What they do, they killed him. So Aaron says, let's slow it down. The bottom line is that when you talk about the leader, there's two types of leaders. There is the leader that his job is to say what is moral. That's the prophet. That's the judge. There, you cannot sway from that. You cannot, if your position is to declare right from wrong, you cannot compromise because you're the standard bearer. If your position is the priest is a little bit different. The priest is closer to the people, and the priest is supposed to inspire the people. His job is not necessarily to be the one to declare what is right and what is wrong. So when your position is the priest, you have to think about, not am I saying the right thing right now, but how am I going to communicate with these people in the best way? So there's a concept in the Talmud, for example, that says, just like it's a mitzvah to say words that will be heard, because it's a mitzvah to rebuke your fellow. If someone's doing something wrong, it's a mitzvah to speak out. But the same Talmud says there's a mitzvah not to speak up when you think the words are going to be counterproductive. Right now, if you're the moral voice, if you're the job, if you're the code of law, if you're the prophet, and they ask you what's the right and wrong, I don't think you have a choice. But if you're the priest and you're the point is that Aaron's defense is that you have to sometimes do what's practical, and you have to sometimes find ways to communicate to people who don't want to listen to you. Now, whether or not it's always the right thing is another question. But the point is that obviously it depends. Obviously, the answer is it depends. And obviously, according to the sages, there is a problem with Aaron. Aaron is imperfect for this reason. And some people actually think that the reason why he doesn't go into the land of Israel has nothing to do with hitting the rock. That's just a cover-up. That's just to hide behind that. The real reason is that Aaron made the calf and Moshe sent the spies. That's, for example, that Barbanel believes that. And he believes that the hitting of the rock is just a distraction. We don't want to talk about the sin. So God finds a small infraction and says it's because of that infraction, but it's not really about that infraction. So the point is, it's a complicated story. But the idea here is that my point only is that even if you're very loving, that there is a fault in Aaron that he did not have that idea of the zealotry of standing up for the truth. And maybe his grandson, now the family is complete because you see priests have the ability to also not just be the loving people that everybody loves to love, but also who stand up for the truth even when it's uncomfortable.
And the irony here is that the ambivalence about the character is more about Pinchas and less about Aaron, which
right.
I don't get either.
So part of that is because Jewish people like that or don't like that, and depends what you're looking at it. Jewish people have a very hard time with acts of violence, even when it's justified. And I don't want to get political, or I don't think it's politics, but if you turn on, if you look at the debate in Israel today about the war, of how to conduct it and when to conduct it, and nobody fights a war like the Jewish people. I mean, I don't want to get into this right now, but the reality is that we have a very hard time with violence and standing up and being and I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. To go to war requires a certain cruelness, and you have to be strategic, and you have to be able to sacrifice sometimes few for the many. We're not able to do that. Now, that could be a problem, or that could be an advantage, but the bottom line is we're not a normal people. That's the fact. I mean, I don't think, our character is not meant for violence. And that's why that's why we're doing things that no other nation would do. So regardless if it's a character flaw or if it's a righteousness, I don't know it's not a simple answer, but the bottom line is we have a certain aversion to violence. And this is why Pinchas's act always made people uncomfortable and still makes people uncomfortable. But the reality is that God, I think there's no other way to read it, that God says sometimes this is necessary. I don't think there's any other honest way of reading those verses. Maybe, he gets peace for his priesthood, for him, for his descendants. I don't think there could be a greater endorsement. Now, the fact that it's ambivalent is the whole point. And the thesis is, I'll take the doctor's question in a second, but the thesis is there's two models of leadership. There's Moshe, which leads when there's clarity, spiritual clarity, and there's Pinchas, which is the ability to operate even when there's no spiritual clarity. And if you want to speak in simple English, top down and bottom up. Top down is when the Torah tells you exactly what to do. Bottom up is when the Torah doesn't tell you and you have to try to figure out on your own. And you're taking much more risk. But the thesis is going to be when a person operates trying to listen to the voice from within, then they are actually much more transformed because they have to try to find the voice within themselves. And in a way, it's lasting. And the idea that you can pass that to your child, pass that priesthood to your child, is an expression of that idea that it's been internalized and therefore it's part of who you are and therefore it can be passed on. Whereas Moshe's style is top down. It's God revealing himself. It doesn't mean that you have been transformed. It doesn't mean you can pass that on to your children. So that's the thesis here. And that's why built into the story is the ambivalence and the confusion, because it was a very confusing time. And it's important to hear about these confusing times because for most of history, we're living in a model of Pinchas, not Moshe. In most of history, we do not have a direct prophecy of what to do. And like I said, we move from prophecy to scholarship. Scholarship is you have to use your own mind to try to mine what is the divine will, which is much more tricky and much more ambivalent, and therefore there has many disagreements in the Talmud. And everything I say, you can ask, maybe it's the opposite, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I misread, maybe my motives are not just, etc. But that's where internalization happens, and that's where true leadership happens, when people have to find the answers by themselves for themselves. Of course, based on the divine wisdom, but you don't have a clear, direct communication line with above. God says, you figure it out. And that's where internalization happens. And in some ways, like I tried to make a big deal about this on Tuesday, that's the big shift that you have in the second half of the book of Numbers in the 40th year. Up to this point, Moshe is telling us what to do. And the minute we step away from Moshe's direct orders, we get into trouble, right? Because Moshe says, okay, go see the land of Israel, see if you want it. Okay, they go off, they fail completely because you want to know what I want? I want to go back to Egypt. You want me to do what God wants? I'll go to Israel, right? But the idea that 40 years later, now the people themselves are able to find within themselves that intuitively, and that is consistent with the will of God. That's Pinchas, and you see in other places throughout the story, the most clear one is the daughters of Tzalafchad, where they say we want to inherit our father's land. Up to that point, women cannot inherit. And God says they were right. The daughters of Tzalafchad are speaking justly. They're speaking justly. So why didn't God say that at Sinai? Why wasn't that conveyed to Moshe? No, this is something that comes from the people. This is 40 years later. The people from within themselves could learn to find the will of God, even when it's not expressly expressed. So this is a big shift. It's not a small matter. It's a tremendous shift that almost goes unnoticed by these few stories coming together, but these stories are woven together to tell a tale, and you have to see the overarching narrative. Go ahead, Dr. Tamron, please.
Rabbi, you've been talking about aspects of leadership, bottom up, down out, but you also talked a little bit about sagacity or wisdom. And you said that in a way, it's more profound not to learn like we're doing, but to live with. So my question is this: if you really wanted to learn from the Rebbe, you would probably have to live with them. If I want to learn from you, I probably should live in your house instead of listening to your lecture. So what's your thought about that in terms of the conveyance of what's really important from
I think that wisdom is important, and the teacher is going to give you, I'm not taking myself, but the teacher is going to give you ideas of how to think and how to live. But you know this more than I, because to make a confession, when we first met and we first started studying Torah, it was a transformative experience for me. I never had this anywhere because I've been in yeshiva for 20 years, but no one ever did this to me. Because no matter what I said, Dr. Tamron was kind enough to say, how does this apply to your life? I was like, I have no idea. I wasn't trained to think that way. But that was your question. How's it apply to your life? So in other words, the idea, the abstract idea, even though it's critical, it's the first step of growth, but that's not interesting. What's interesting is how do you apply it to your life? Mm-hmm. And in some ways, you can't go to step 2 before you have step 1. You have to have the idea. But if you stop at the idea and say, I know the idea, but then how do you apply it to your life? What does it mean to you? Then you're missing a very important stage. There's a Hasidic story. I have no idea if it happened. Maybe we'll ask AI. but the Hasidim said the story, so it doesn't matter if it happened. You know, somebody said all stories are true. Some happened and some didn't happen yet.
That's
You know, so
a parable. That's what you told us about parables last
yeah,
week.
yeah. So what's the other thing? Yeah. What was the other idea? The idea is
You
yeah,
were
what
telling a story of
forgetting
that
the final.
maybe it happened and maybe
So
it
this
didn't.
is the story of Aristotle. The story is that Aristotle talks about what's the best way to live and the moral life. And the story is that once his students caught him doing something completely immoral. And they said, Rebbe, I don't know if they said Rebbe, they said, teacher, how could you be doing this? This is sort of the antithesis of everything you've been preaching about your entire career. So I have no idea what Aristotle said, but I'll tell you what our teachers in yeshiva, what they said. And they spoke in Yiddish. I'm pretty certain that Aristotle didn't know Yiddish. Maybe he knew Latin, but I don't think he knew Yiddish, Greek, Latin, not Yiddish. But he said, according to the teacher in yeshiva, he said in Yiddish, now I'm not Aristotle. Aristotle, I'm giving my lecture. When I'm out sinning, I'm not Aristotle. I'm just living my life, right? So that's a separation, a dichotomy between the idea and my life. And what do you have a question? How come I'm not living compared to what I teach? What does one have to do with the other? I'm not getting paid. There's a funny story. Oh my God, this is a bad story. It's a funny story.
These are great stories.
I have a worse.
Because what you're saying is how you act is more important than what you say.
Correct, for sure. But the idea is that I'm not trying to take away wisdom. There is a statement in the Talmud that says, Tachlit Chachma, the ultimate wisdom is good deeds. So that's the complex thing. It's not saying good deeds are the only thing that's important. No, wisdom is important. But the point is, it's not wisdom unless it's applied. Unless your wisdom leads you to good deeds, it's not really wisdom. It means it's just abstract entertainment, right? So we're not saying you have wisdom and you have good deeds, and good deeds are more important. That may be true, but that's simplistic. We're saying something much deeper. We're saying wisdom itself, the ultimate goal of wisdom itself, the ultimate test of wisdom itself is when it's applied and it makes a difference. Because if it's abstract, it doesn't matter. You know, that's when people make a mistake. You have political beliefs that economic systems, let's say socialism, assuming we think socialism, the way it was applied in the 20th century, was very evil. So some people would say, look, the idea is a good idea. It just practically, it just in the practice, it doesn't work. That may be true, but on a deeper level, if it doesn't work in practice, then it's not a good idea. You see what I'm saying? If the idea can only work in the abstract, then you have wisdom, but you don't have good deeds. So that the application tells you about the quality of the wisdom. So the point is not that you don't have to learn from the teacher and you only have to see how the teacher lives his life, but you have to learn from the teacher. But the point is, if it's just the learning and it's not the application, you miss the point. Okay, I want to take 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes to read a little bit of the essay inside, because why not? They'll be ground us. We'll learn the Rebbe's words. But the big picture is, again, there's top down and bottom up, and Moshe is top down, and Pinchas is bottom up. And you could really connect it if you really want to think about it. And another way to think about this is Torah study and prayer. Okay, what is Torah study? Torah study is my job now is to try to understand what the divine wisdom says in this circumstance. I study the Talmud. Talmud says this is the law. I want to know how, what, where, when. And sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, the Talmudic conclusion does not resonate with me. I don't necessarily feel connected to the conclusion. There's a lot of things in the Talmud that are counterintuitive, right? For example, the Talmud says that if you lost, okay, I don't want to bring examples. We're going to get into the Talmud. But when you study Torah, the idea is, can I try to understand the divine wisdom? That's top down. Torah is top down. What is prayer? Prayer, there's no such thing as prayer if it's counterintuitive. Prayer is, how do I feel? I have to love God, not what does God think I should feel. That's something else. Prayer is my own voice. How do I feel about my relationship with God? That is a completely different thing. That's bottom up, that's Pinchas. And that's why the sacrifices, the collective sacrifices in this parsha are in this parsha, because seemingly the sacrifices to the end of the parsha, from the 5th reading and on, all the daily sacrifices and the holidays and Rosh Chodesh and Shabbat, etc. What's it doing in the 4th book? It belongs in the 3rd book. 3rd book is the book of the offerings. So I think it's related in the sense, because if you're talking about top down, offerings are top down, and we know that there's no more offerings. So prayer is the substitute for the offerings. Why? Because both the offerings and prayer represent the fact, how do I feel? How do I express my relationship with God? How inspired I am by creation. How does that make me feel about connecting to God? That's what it is. There's no such thing as top-down love. Love is, I have to cultivate a love to God. And the point is that inspiration is very different than Torah study. Both are important. Don't get me wrong. You need Moshe, you need Pinchas. You need top-down, you need bottom-up. But it's two separate tracks. And Moshe represents Torah in a way. And well, in Torah, you can get into written Torah, oral Torah, you can get specific. But if you want to speak generally speaking, Torah and prayer. Torah is I'm opening up myself to hear what is the word of God. And I have to try to understand it and internalize it. But it's ultimately, there's an objective truth out there. Prayer is entirely subjective. How do I feel? And that's Pinchas, and that's everlasting, and that's internalization. Because internalization is Pinchas. Internalization happens when it doesn't come from above. That's the thesis. We're going to go 5 minutes. We'll read some of the essay inside. I'm jumping to section 7 because I'm trying to get to the core of the idea, and hopefully this is meaningful, and hopefully we explained it at least somewhat. Okay, let's see what happens here. See if I can show my eyesight is okay. Okay.
Are we on Sunday, Rabbi?
Yes, God willing, yes. Okay, I'm going to go for another 4 minutes. We'll see how much we do. The core of the distinction between the divine service of Moshe and that of Pinchas can be explained as follows. Moshe's divine service followed the motif of revelation from above downward, top down, i.e., it was motivated and characterized by the revelation of divine light. Pinchas' divine service, by contrast, follows the motif of ascent from below, refining the lower plane and elevating it upward. And that's the point of that Dr. Bob keeps saying, that Pinchas, there's no clarity. It's ambivalent. We don't know what to do. Yeah, you have to figure it out. There's no clarity. There's no light from above. Therefore, Moshe's mission primarily involved receiving the Torah. Moshe is a conveyor of the word of God. It's top down. As our sages emphasize, Moses received, as a revelation from above, the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it. When the ethics of the fathers want to say what's Moshe, when they want to characterize Moshe's career, they don't say Moshe studied Torah. They say Moshe received the Torah. Kibel, what does reception mean? You didn't create it, you're just receiving it. It's coming from above. Teaching it to his students and the Jewish people as a whole. This approach does not affect the person in the intellectual sphere, but affects his conduct as a whole. Thus, the Torah cautions against and prevents involvement with undesirable matters, following the motif of Torah is light. In other words, of course, you're getting the light from above. It's supposed to change you. Like we talked about, it's not only important the wisdom, but how it's applied. Of course, it's supposed to change you, but it still has the limitation that it's top down. Just as light dispels darkness as a matter of course, the divine light of the Torah causes darkness to be dispelled as a matter of course, as the natural outcome of the revelation from above. The problem we're going to say is that Torah is light and it'll bring light to your life. But what happens when you stop learning? You go away from the book, or the book doesn't have direct information about what to do in the scenario. So light is good, but light is not good when the lights are off, right? So what do you do in the dark? For that, you need Pinchas. Pinchas' divine service motivated the Jews to do teshuvah through an utterly different motif. His actions spurred them to break through the darkness, elevate themselves, and return to God. That is much, much more a messy and less clarity, and in some ways much more complicated, but in other ways much more transformative. So that's the idea. We'll stop here. We'll take Vicky's question. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful day, wonderful Shabbat. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. Actually, was hoping that essay would answer my question.
Maybe it will. We read exactly like 1% of the essay. It's a very long essay.
Right, but my question arises when you mentioned the Jewish character, and I know the Jewish character is described in Talmud in detail. Maybe that's a topic for the next series of lectures. But how does that affect, and how does it affect our decision making? For example, like Pinchas was rewarded and his descendants were rewarded. So apparently there was something in his character that contributed to him making a practical decision at the right moment.
Right. So there's the idea of making a practical decision. There's also the idea of doing the tough decision, tough love. We're not, Jewish parents are not known, maybe some are, I don't know. Tough love is a problem. So, but the idea is that naturally, the Talmud says that we're descendants of Abraham. So the natural state of the Jew is compassionate and someone who does kindness. But that is not always the character necessary to survive in this world. So we have to cultivate and find with everybody has all characters. You can cultivate it. But the point is that compassion comes much more natural to the Jewish character. If you want to generalize, I hope the haters are not going to quote me and say I'm a bad person, I'm a this or that. But I would say if you have to generalize, that's what the Talmud says, that the simanim, the signs of a Jewish person is, the Jewish character is kindness and compassionate. And when a person has to take tough action, you can do it, but it doesn't come easy. It doesn't come natural.
Right. That's one of the practical lessons we can learn from
Pinchas. They have to act, and sometimes acting is uncomfortable.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi.
Wonderful, everyone. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos. Thank you all.
Chazak Baruch, Rabbi. Shabbat
Thank you.
Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.